that whole debate of like what's an agnostic, what's an atheist, what's a this, what's a that, it's pretty much personal preference. I'm not going to comment and say you don't know what an agnostic is, you don't know what an atheist is. Like,
I believe that you have a sense that when you look around, there is meaning to life and that it's not random chance.
Wow, you see all the beauty of creation, but then a lot of Christians just forget about the ugliness of God's creation sometimes. They know it's wrong deep down inside, but they just do it anyways. Would that mean that they are going to hell?
It's only one determination that makes the difference. It's not about what you did. It's not about actions in either direction. It's not about actions down, and it's not about actions up. There is one determining factor, and it is the knowledge of Jesus Christ.
And that's why I think it's more for God to know that all these children in the entire world, past, present, and future, will die in some sort of way that won't live a fulfilling life, but will also die a horrible, painful death for nothing. Do you think that if you somehow were presented or had the feeling that God might not be true, would you encourage that, or would you kind of just stuff it?
All right, hello and welcome to Credence Questions. Tonight I'm joined by Nolan, and Nolan is coming at us from a bit of a different perspective. He designated himself on a recent video of mine where I've been talking about the subjects of atheism and wanting to interact with atheism and agnosticism and trying to correctly understand it. And I got a couple of responses back on that video, but one of them was his. And Nolan, you are an agnostic atheist. If that's correct. And so I'd love if you could tell me a little bit about what that is and a little bit about your background of how you came to determine that was your perspective, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with my background, I'd say.
Go for it.
So I was born in a very conservative Baptist family. I went to Baptist church every Sunday and Wednesday for my whole life up to about 16 or 17, I'd say. And then to make a long story short, my family moved to a non-denominational church. And that church was very, to put it lightly, they were cult-ish, I'd say. They were a little more isolationist. They discouraged talking about anything outside of their own teachings. And they were almost like perfectionists. Like, they didn't believe in, I know you know these terms, but like they didn't believe in once saved, always saved, like permanent salvation. They believed you could lose your salvation if you didn't repent constantly, things like that. They didn't believe in paid pastors. They hated tithes, like all that sort of stuff. It was
really
interesting. There's an interesting little non-denominational church there. And whenever I was there, I felt like I was doing everything wrong. I didn't get that feeling of like I could be connected with God, and they kept telling me that like if you don't get this, then you're going to go to hell, things like that. And eventually I got pushed to a point where I was literally walking outside for probably like an hour or two. And I just walked outside, just like begging, like crying out to God, saying like, man, if you could show me anything to like that you're even there, then I'll do anything you want. And after that happened, I still felt like I was failing. I still felt like there was nothing there. So that's the point where I kind of went over an edge of like looking into other things. So funny enough, it actually started with Joe Rogan. Because it wasn't because of his religious perspectives, but it was because like it actually started off with he would look into like different drugs, and he would talk to people who have taken different drugs and like psychedelic drugs, where people were like, oh, I've seen God and stuff like that. And that made me kind of question a little bit. That started like the questioning and stuff like that. And so I was like, well, maybe Christianity isn't the way. So I started looking a little into other religions. I immediately started looking into the debates between Christians and atheists, Christians and other religions. And after just a journey for a couple months of a lot of emotional turmoil, because Christianity was what I knew my whole life, eventually I decided that, the evidence that pointed to God seemed less and less likely, especially because a lot of it seemed like an emotional appeal rather than a strict clinging on to the evidence that this God is real and that there's signs of him in the world and stuff like that. So eventually it got to a point where I was like, I don't say that God doesn't exist, but I also don't think I have enough proof to convince me that God exists. So that's why I call myself an agnostic atheist. so that's kind of like the whole backstory of where I've been. So I know all about the Christian, or at least my Christian world, like the Baptists and the everything like that. But I guess going back to your video, I would call myself an agnostic atheist because I just go by the word definition, I'd say. Atheist being atheist, meaning not a theist, right?
Yes.
So a theist is someone who believes in God, and a meaning not is just somebody who doesn't believe in God. That's the simplest I can put it, you know. And if you apply that to agnosticism, agnostic means a not, and gnostic meaning to know. That's one of the definitions, is to know. So it is to not know. So if you put those things together, I don't know that God doesn't exist, but I also don't know that he does exist, right? There's a knowledge part, and then there's a belief part. I kind of mentally I separate those two things, because you can believe something and you can know something, right? I kind of like separate those two terms. And I know in your video, I kind of just like laid out like your perspective on agnosticism was, I think, quoting you, said they can't come to a conclusion about God, and not against God, they just haven't evaluated the evidence, or maybe they have a little bit. But basically, there's no reason for them to look into it, and it's unimportant. And I think it's just, to me, that whole debate of like, what's an agnostic, what's an atheist, what's a this, what's a that, it's pretty much personal preference. I mean, you know, like, if I'm not going to comment and say, you don't know what an agnostic is, you don't know what an atheist is, like, I'm not going to do that, you know. But I'd say that I call myself that because I have a certain perspective on what those words mean, you know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I sound super aligned with you there. I feel like, because that was my experience beforehand, is that I was talking about those things, I guess, without having put them in a strict category. And so this started, I was talking about Jordan Peterson being on Surrounded, which was a huge thing at the time for the Christian and atheist YouTube community. And so I was talking about him responding to a lot of people who I thought in the video were actually agnostic and not atheist. And so I was making the point that they're not like up there like actively against the belief in God, but they're just people who like don't think that there's a God or something along those lines. And so I guess I was trying to differentiate between people who are sort of in denial about the existence of God, like would deny the existence of God, even if it's because of a deficiency of evidence, even if they say like there's not enough evidence to make me believe there's a God. And then a different group of people that just like doesn't believe in God. And so I mean, I grew up talking to what I thought was both, you know, and I had people that I characterized as atheists, which was like people who said like, I don't think there's a God. I don't believe there's a God. I've examined the evidence and I don't believe that there's a God. And then I had people who just like didn't grow up in a religious household, didn't pray, never met, like never went to church. Like they just found it uninteresting, and they didn't like, it was not an important question to them or an important topic to talk about. And so in my mind, I always characterized that as agnostic versus atheist. So I think the terminology that you used of it being like, I mean, not no gods, which is what atheist is. And so like, I believe there is no God. And then agnostic being, I don't know if there's a God. I feel like that's accurate to that in my head. But then the blowback that I got on the video that you watched was I kind of said that. And then there is a whole camp of people who are not like you, who are kind of like very passionate about what atheism actually means. And so they kind of rushed in to slap my wrist on that and to show me that I think the biggest objection is that saying atheists believe there is no God is not the same as saying an atheist doesn't believe in God. So it's almost like they either believe something, and that something is that there isn't a God, or they don't believe in anything. There is a lack of belief. There is no belief in God. So like, does that make sense to you? Because that characterization does confuse me.
To me, I've heard this between atheists like themselves about a separation between like, they call it like capital A or hard A atheism and like regular atheism, where it's like a capital A atheism is like, I'd say there's the neutral position, and then there's like the claim position, where it's like the capital atheism is like, there is no God, like point blank period. Kind of like how a theist says there is a God. Those are two claims that are now required to be backed up with evidence.
Yes.
And I hate, might be controversial. I hate that perspective personally about there not being a God at all. Like saying there is no God at all.
Yes.
I hate that position because that shows a little bit of ignorance about, like, I think that shows that they don't really have any intellectual humility, saying that there is no God. But if you just say there is no supernatural being out there, there's an infinite possibility of supernatural beings that somebody could claim.
Yes.
That even if they don't have like sufficient evidence to support it, it could still be out there.
Sure.
And if that ends up being true, then that hard A atheist now has made they fumbled the ball. They've made a claim that is not supported by evidence, because there's no way you can get all the evidence in the universe to say, like, nope, all your claims are wrong. Nobody has that knowledge. Even the Christian God could be true. I admit that, but there's not enough evidence to convince me that one does exist, that the steps haven't been completed in my head. So that's why I call myself just a regular atheist. I say that there's no way I can prove every single God wrong, but I can prove very specific definitions of a God wrong, right?
Yes.
If somebody describes their God in such minute detail, to me, sometimes it's very easy to debunk that specific God and say, like, that God's not true, but all these other ones could be true, right?
Yeah.
So I could be like a hard atheist to, like, I don't know, just as an example, I could be like a hard atheist to, like, Buddha, or no, I don't even know if that applies, but you know what I mean. So
you could be, yeah.
So I could be like a hard atheist to a very specific definition of a God that is just directly contradictory to the world as we know it, right? And I could be like that. Even then, I wouldn't just make a definitive statement. I'd be like, that one is most likely not true. I'm just going to discard that. If some like groundbreaking evidence shows up where that thing ends up being true, or most likely true, then I'll have to change my position, right? But because I always just leave a tiny bit of wiggle room for everything in life, because you have no idea what could be right, what could be wrong,
Yeah. So certainly it's like a spectrum to some extent as to when you say you're an atheist, you can mean a lot of things by it. And then I feel like in the video, I characterized that third position, what you're calling, I think, hard A atheist, or I characterized a group that I called anti-theists, which is sort of, I went far enough to say, to me, this would be the people who are in the atheist camps, the people who are, doing the debates and teaching the lectures. This is like the Stephen Fry's of the world and Sam Harris's. Like, they not only disbelieve the existence of God, but they think it's stupid and harmful. And to me, that's like a degree further. Like, it's not like they don't think there's the possibility of a God, and they think the explanations we have of God are also stupid and harmful. And so they're sort of against the belief in God. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's a step too far?
I'd say that anti-theism is a thing. I definitely agree with that. For me, because of my own moral system, which we can talk about, I'd say that I think that religion can be harmful, just like anything can be harmful, right?
Sure.
So religion can be harmful in the sense that, like, it can make Muslims kill themselves, suicide bombs, right? It can make them do that. It can push them so far, and they can have such like a belief in something that it forces them to do something that maybe it wasn't intended, right?
Yes.
Just like with Christianity, there's been tons of things in the name of Christianity that have been very vile, disgusting things.
Sure.
And I don't say that all Christians are bad, or Christianity as a whole is terrible and evil and disgusting, because these very, very minute select people have taken it to such a far degree that no other Christian agrees with them.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So like, I wouldn't consider myself an anti-theist because I think that religion can be harmful. But like you said, the Sam Harris's, the whoever the prominent atheists are who say that people who believe in religion are stupid or whatever. I just don't like to go that far, because I think that's not constructive. I think that it actually makes people hate atheists more. Yes. Because not everybody is like that. You know, it's very
Yes.
convincing for atheists, you know, just like pastors are convincing for theists. But I don't think that's like Aaron Ra, for example. I think
Mhm.
you know who that is,
Yes.
right? I've never liked watching him as an atheist because he can be very abrasive and very
Yes.
demeaning. Um, and that does not go well with me because I think the reason why we're both in this call is because we both strive for constructive conversations. We strive for learning new things, for learning new ideas, to find out what's wrong with my perspective and see how we can
Mhm.
adjust it. That's
Yes.
our I believe that's our level of conversation. But for people like that, they're just there to win. They're there to make the other guy look stupid and make the other guy look wrong so that they can
Yep.
either feel better about themselves or make it so that their followers, you know, are excited or entertained or something like that. You know, that's why I've
Yes.
liked watching people like Alex O'Connor, um,
Yes.
Matt Dillahunty mostly.
He's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, mostly. I would say that there are times when I don't fully agree with his perspectives or
Hmm.
his approach, especially when he was with the atheist experience. There are times when
Yes.
he'd be pretty demeaning or very, you know, abrasive to the callers, which I didn't think was necessary. But
Yeah.
I just like his debate style and the fact that he's very blunt, which is sometimes necessary in a debate. But anyways,
Yes.
so yeah, I'd say that for sure. That the abrasive style just doesn't really hit well with people like me or like you. You know.
Yes, I think I made the same point in the video about.
Hmm.
I just also think that conversation is so much more constructive than debate, because I'm sure, like you, I grew up really enjoying listening to debate. I like listening to debates, and I think that they're entertaining. But I do think that it is few and far between people who have their minds changed off of a debate
Hmm. Yeah.
versus listening to a conversation. Because
Mhm.
if you listen to a person just explain where they're coming from for several hours, I really think that you get more out of that than people trying to make
Mhm.
an orchestrated point that is
Yeah.
like a better point than their opponent. So I
Mhm.
very much and totally agree with that.
Yeah, because the point that you made in your you basically just said online debate style, it doesn't change people's minds. It's just point blank. And
Yes.
I had a little bit of a disagreement, not completely, because
Sure.
I'd say the debate. Like, I think you're right that very specific, like different kinds of debate style, like the yelling back and forth or like being very bad faith and stuff like that. That does nothing. That
Mm.
exists only to bolster your own following, right?
Yes.
Because it's like a gladiator style, like lion, like David versus Goliath. It's just like an
Yep.
entertainment thing, you know.
Yep.
But but conversations like this or conversations like debate the all I feel like all the debates with Alex O'Connor with whoever he's debating, I've enjoyed those the most. And
Yes, I agree.
I've adjusted my beliefs the most because
Mm.
of their debate style and the fact that they're honest and they're really trying to, you know, either like break apart their points and like point out the flaws or whatever the case may be. Um, because I've had my mind changed, obviously, since converting from Christianity to or deconverting from Christianity to being an atheist.
Yeah.
Obviously, I had my mind changed through debate.
Yes.
That's mainly what I watched to deconvert myself um, was debates because I didn't want to put myself in an echo chamber and just like focus on one thing. I wanted to analyze both perspectives, analyze the best arguments from both perspectives, and learn from like analyze for myself. Like
Yes.
which one was more rational to me, which one made more logical sense, which one had more evidence pointing in that direction, you know?
Yes.
Um, and so with you just saying that one statement, I don't think that was like your intention to say like online debate is worthless. Like there's no reason
Mm.
to do it. Like there's a purpose, and people have been
Sure.
convinced by debates either
Yes.
gradually or drastically. Most likely, I'd say gradually. You know, people
Yes.
kind of like have those bricks either built up or brought back down like over time. You know, as they
Mm.
look into it more and more. Um, but that was the one little like difference I had with your statement, which I don't think that was like your full intention with what you said, but
Yeah.
I kind of just pointed that out. But
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I do think that I think debates are useful and that they have a place, but I would go so far as to say I think that they are less beneficial than conversations at this point in time.
I'd
And
agree.
to me, it's almost like a new science to some extent because like until there was Joe Rogan, there wasn't this idea of like, let's, get together and for 4 hours talk about what we think about things
Right.
in the public domain, at least. Like people
I'd
were doing
agree.
that with their friends at campfires and such. But like,
Yeah.
and I did that with my friends growing up, which is part of why I love it so much. And so I guess for me, it felt more like I feel like usually in a debate, the only thing that wins is a person's ego. And there's points like you made that there's points within the debate that are made that are usually better points than the other person's points. And those are useful. They're useful factoids and things to learn. But when you really, I think, look at a person's character and look at what they're trying to say and why they're trying to say it, and then they get to examine the points kind of like honestly in a non-prepared and non-presentation fashion. I see it wholly being more beneficial. So to me, I would say that debate still has a place, but I almost think it would be better if we just switched them all over to conversations. I wish that everybody was sitting down with the moderator if necessary, if they're going to get fiery, but just like sitting down and speaking to one another.
Sure.
I find it more beneficial.
Yeah, there's a video, I know it was between Alex O'Connor and Ben Shapiro, where they just sat down at a table and they had a conversation, over a table instead of like at a podium where you get like the formal debate style and stuff like that. Which those, I would say that those do have more, I'd say they have more of an emotional appeal because they're not like, it's not like a very formal, like you feel like there's so much at stake or there's like, there's a winner and a loser. But whenever you have a normal conversation where there's no stakes, there's no like strict back and forth. It's just like a free flowing conversation. I feel like that is more genuine, and I do think people react to people being genuine more than it seems like somebody's just reading off a script, like most people are in debates.
Yes.
So I would agree with you on that point.
Yeah, 100%.
I think I had a pretty big disagreement when it came to you talking about like all people recognize deep in their soul that they know God. I had a pretty visceral, not visceral reaction. It's not like, oh my God, but but I was like, like that's pretty interesting. That's a point I've heard with other people, other Christians as well. As I know, there's a lot of things in the Bible that just it's just thrown out there that I understand that Christians take as truth and as like a universal fact. But for me, it feels like it's not really like being gracious to the facts of reality in a sense, because just stating point blank that it, you're just what do you think that means whenever you say like, imagine if it was reversed, where I said, deep down that God isn't real, but you're just hiding it, or you're pushing it down, or you've just convinced yourself so hard that God exists that like you just can't think of a world that's not God, but like deep down you really know. Like to me that does come off as kind of condescending a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
But if you want to like expound on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because it's definitely not meant to condescend. And I think, I don't know, you might have the exact quote, but I guess I try not to say that everybody knows deep down. I might have said everybody kind of knows deep down or something like that. But I do think that the truth is, and I mean, it is in the Bible, you're right. And that's why I believe it to be true. But Paul says that you're without excuse because the evidence of God is within and without, essentially, and everywhere all the time. But it's not as simplistic as like, I think you, Nolan, have a thing in your heart where you actually know God is real and you're just like ignoring it and letting it irritate, like something like that. That's not what I mean. And so that's not what it is. I think it's subtler than that. But it's about being, I would say, open to the suggestion. So I guess I would posit to you that I think that you have a sense, like, and I don't want to condescend, but I truly do believe this. And if it's not true, then I'd love for you to tell me why not, because like, it's not meant to be condescending. I believe that you have a sense that when you look around, there is meaning to life and that it's not random chance.
Sure.
and that it's not, like your life doesn't feel random to you, and it
Mm,
doesn't feel, and like when you see a sunset and a sunrise, it doesn't feel
mhm.
accidental to you, and it
Sure.
feels something feels transcendent about it.
Sure.
And I would say that that's starting to glimpse the point that I'm making.
Sure. I think I can definitely I can relate to that feeling. I can. I feel like
Yes.
every atheist would be dishonest to say that there isn't that knee jerk reaction to say like, man, this is like it's almost like it's so beautiful that your brain sometimes can't comprehend that it was just natural, that it wasn't like created by God or a supernatural being or whatever.
Mm,
Um, but for me, I guess like because I was a Christian, obviously,
sure.
and internally, I never got whenever somebody else, well, some other Christians would say like, "Oh my God," like they would just like have to like describe this like really visceral like emotional connection to God. I just couldn't relate. I just couldn't.
Sure.
Like I honestly wished that I could, but I just couldn't.
Yes.
And intellectually, I was like, yeah, like I know that I've been taught that God created the world. Like I intellectually believed, but and I think that's why like it was such a not a quick deconstruction, but just like it was such like a thorough like deconstruction when it was like I kind of kept the emotional appeal out of it because I think that emotional
Mm,
appeal is one of the driving factors of Christianity, to be honest. I think it's one of the most driving factors. Like when you're in your quote, it says that everyone knows that they're in debt, and when you tell them, they recognize it if they're open-hearted. And I think
mm,
that also
yes.
pads on to the feeling. I'm not saying that you are like being condescending, but that sort of the feeling of like you're kind of implying that we're being ingenuine, that like we're all atheists are like closed-hearted because we don't think we're in debt because we don't believe that there's a
Mm,
God to be in debt to, right? So
sure.
because you do have to believe in the God first before you feel that you're in debt to something. Because if I don't think I'm sinning every day, then how can I feel like I owe God something because I don't think I'm, breaking any rules. Of course, I have a moral
Mm,
system. You could say because I was the way I was raised, but
sure.
I have a moral system, and I've done the work to like redefine my moral system through like secular humanism and through these different moral philosophies that like I think matches my moral compass the best.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, um, I think there is the knee jerk reaction to say like, "Wow, this place is amazing." Like you see, uh, I think for me it is a spectrum of like, wow, you see all the beauty of creation, but then a lot of Christians just forget about the ugliness of God's creation sometimes, and
Mm,
that doesn't really get talked about a lot. To think about all the natural disasters, and I know you have a video about that. I watched that one. Um, all the natural disasters and all of
yes.
even like the smallest things like how insects treat each other, how insect ants eat, you know, like ants just eat things alive, and how there's a parasite that goes into a fish's mouth that eats its tongue, and then like there's like so many different things about nature that internally Christianity believes that God created everything and that God has a
Mm,
plan for everything. So, there's an insect, I don't remember what it was called, but it's an insect that like puts its eggs in another insect, and the insects eat it from the inside out and then kill it, and then they
yeah.
go off on its way, which is really
Yes.
like crazy stuff. It's pretty
Yeah.
gruesome. Even the ailments that humans get because of we're just on planet Earth. COVID-19, great example. Lots of people died from could be Chinese lab, but could have been from bats. Like just things that come from nature, like the Black Plague that came from mice, like but way back when. Like all these different
Yes.
natural things that like wreaked havoc on humans and just nature in general. And then you're like, man, I have these two things where it's like I have all these like natural beauties in the world, but I also have these like really disgusting like this disgusting ugliness that the world provides, and the same God created
Yes.
both of them, right? So I think it's like
Mm,
weird that Christians point out the beauty, and they're like, "Oh my God, like God created all this; it's so beautiful. Like God had to make it." But then, like whenever you start pointing out the bad things, it gets a little bit harder to like describe like why God would make it that way, because God's just always defined as like this beautiful, awesome creator, but then you have to start
Yes.
explaining the really bad stuff, you know? And
Yes.
a lot of Christians have different reasons for it, so I would love to hear yours.
Yes. I mean, yeah. Well, so two things on your points there. On the second one, I would say that God did not create it that way, and that is the standard Christian explanation.
Sure.
It's not ordained to be that way, and those things are a different type of sign. And so when Paul is referring to the signs in nature making you know that something transcendent is near, that operates in both directions. And so the upward beauty points you towards the heavens, and the downward ugliness points you towards the sin. And so that takes me back to your first point that you made, which is that you don't think that a person can recognize that they're in debt unless that they understand that there's someone to be in debt to. And I actually just fundamentally disagree with that. I think that the message of the gospel is the opposite of that. It's that all people understand their insufficiency, which is probably a better way of putting it than being in debt. The insufficiency to solve their own problems, to accomplish their own things, to even control their own emotions and have control over their own lives. I would say that people recognize that. And then beyond that, I think most people even recognize that they're sinful. And this is, again, it's not meant to be condescending. It really isn't, because a good Christian will admit to you that they are very sinful. And so it's meant to be embracive and relatable. And it is based on experience. I've talked with numerous people on the channel, including, people who are missionaries, for example, and when they go over to another country who's never heard of the gospel, they never heard of Jesus Christ, they don't come from the Christian background that we have, but they tell those people about it, and those people recognize that they're a sinner, and like way more desperately than people in America do. Like they recognize that they are the problem, and that's a crazy thing to hear. That's really a crazy thing, because you would not expect somebody who's never been confronted with the Christian worldview to have the belief independently that they are the problem and they're waiting for a solution. And so I think that that speaks to the nature of existence. I've seen it in people personally, and I've seen it in stories told to me by people across the world, that there is and I felt it intrinsically and personally. And so again, I would point out the subtlety that I mentioned to you before, because it's not necessarily this big presence right in front of your face that I think that you're ignoring or avoiding or anything like that. I think that it is more of a simple and subtle thing, that those transcendental suggestions are made to you subtly. And then, as you pointed out about like the people who made you feel like you didn't know Jesus because they were so strong and passionate and vehement about it. That is also true, because what we're not saying is that every person like knows God and should be passionate about it immediately, but that the subtle transcendental cues are there. And if you follow them, they lead you to Jesus Christ. And after you meet him, then that is when the passion comes alive. And so I actually do relate to that, because I was not always a believer. I grew up in a believing household like you. But it was in my later teenage years that I was feeling the exact same thing, feeling like, wait, I know the people around me believe this, but I'm not sure that I believe this. And I do not believe the way they believe. I don't have the faith that they have whatsoever. And it wasn't until later that I feel that I actually encountered Jesus and was able to then feel that. The passion is something different once you actually make the jump. There is a step that has to be taken. And so there's like a small recognition first, and it builds up. And so that's what I would say. I know that's a lot there.
No, yeah. I mean, going back to the first point where you have the missionaries going to other countries and kind of sharing the gospel and getting this like consensus that like, other people feel like they're in debt, or the other people, once they have it explained to them, then they get this like, oh yeah, I do. Like, I would say that's a little interesting, because like other religions have the same thing, right? That's one thing. That's one other big reason why I don't believe in any religion, is because the fact that there are so many religions competing with each other, right? Which is, I think, I personally, I think that's a huge problem for any religion to overcome, is why are there so many other religions, and why are there so many religions that have their own specific denominations that disagree with each other over the same book, right? That to me, that's a pretty big hurdle to overcome, especially with Christianity, which in America alone has like God knows how many denominations, right? And they're all just like completely, not all of them, but like a lot of them are just completely contradicting each other with what the Bible says in like pretty big areas. And it's crazy to me that like the Bible says that God's written his law in every person's heart, that God, apparently the Holy Spirit is influencing all these different people with all these different beliefs, right? Apparently, like obviously they're all claims. Nobody can like validate who has the Holy Spirit and who doesn't. But that just makes it a big like who's who of like who claims to have the Holy Spirit and actually does and actually is spreading the truth, and who claims to have the Holy Spirit and is actually mistaken and they don't because they're interpreting the Bible wrong, or they, whatever the case may be, right?
Sure.
So, and going back to my original point, which is that I think everybody has this feeling of like a consciousness, right? A conscience, where it's like, you're doing something wrong because we've been raised in a certain society where we think something's wrong. But when you go to like these tribes with cannibalistic tendencies, right? They have that because they've always had that. And they don't have this, as far as I know, I can't know what they're feeling, but it seems that they don't have that human instinct to be like, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing it, when they're eating humans on the regular, right? So that's very interesting how like different regions of society, there's tribes in Africa that women just walk around topless all the time, right? But America and a lot of first world countries cover all their women up, in the Islam religion, women are covered up head to toe. Sometimes you can't see their skin at all. And it's so interesting, just the vast difference and variety of moral systems, moral compasses, like how culture has affected morality over the years and stuff like that. It's like there are still Christians in America today that hate homosexuals, hate gay people. They think they should die. They think that they should be stoned. And then you have more liberal Christians who are accepting of them and think that they're still going to heaven and that God loves them and things like that. So just that vast variety, it's just so crazy to me. It's like, how do you pick one? Like how do you say, man, this is more right than this one? And especially when you start looking into the actual evidence supporting it, I would say that Christianity probably has the most evidence supporting it out of all the other ones that I've seen. I would agree with that. But that's like the bar for the other ones is like here, and Christianity's like right there. Like I wouldn't say that Christianity is like up here. I would say like it's like up here maybe, but the level that would convince me is like probably like right here. So like I know there's a lot. You can like pick and choose what you want to respond to in that, but
no, I mean those are fair points, and a lot of people would make those points. I would say that to me, I think I'm more astonished by the similarities than the differences, and so I do think that is a bit of a perspective that you can take. So, I mean, mentioning the tribe is difficult, but there's always going to be niche examples, and I would say that a lot of that can be explained away by human nature quite easily to me, which is like humans are always going to mess up and make mistakes. So we don't expect broad consistency across everything, but we actually have pretty broad consistently, which is like if you can go to most parts of the world and if you like harmed a child, the entire village would gang up on you, like most parts of the world, whether they've been Christianized or not. And so I think that says that there's something there. There's something inherent there. And then there's smaller things that there's more variety on, and then some extreme examples where certain cultures allow things that others don't. But for the most part, like you could say that something like the Ten Commandments is outlawed everywhere in developed society, like overall. And so I think that the similarities are more telling than the differences, to the law being written on the heart type thing.
If I could kind of add a little bit to that, I would agree with you that I think the vast majority of humans in general, like if you're in a society and like a group of people that are like striving towards a common goal, that are trying to live together, you will say, hey, I don't want my stuff stolen, so let's just agree not to steal each other's stuff, even though it does happen.
Sure.
Let's just agree that anybody who steals and gets caught should be kicked out or punished or whatever. Same thing with murder, same thing with like pretty much general rules, right? Would you say that you're talking about those niche groups of people? right? Those niche groups that, those women who walk around with their tops off, right? Would you
Mm.
think that's a sin? Would you say that they are committing a sin, like willingly, and that if they don't repent or get saved, that they're going to hell? If you believe it, I'm guessing you believe in hell. Most Christians do, because I know
Yes.
there's a, what's it called? It's a one where like
Annihilationism is one.
yes,
Yeah.
annihilation, which I think is
I'm
a
not an
more
annihilationist.
sure, yeah. So would you say that they are going to hell, or the tribes that commit cannibalism and things like that, who have not been influenced by outside sources, who don't have that moral system introduced, where it's like you've been told that it's wrong, but it's
Mm.
just assumed by the Christian religion that they know it's wrong deep down inside, but they just do it anyways, even though that's children who were born in that culture and that society will not know anything else but what cannibalism is, and that's okay. And then they can
Yes.
be raised in that for as long as they're not killed and eaten themselves. I don't know. But and would that mean that they are going to hell, or is it more of like a willing acknowledgement that you are sinning and you do it anyways? What's your thought on that?
Well, I would say that it's actually a lot simpler than that. There's only two groups of people, sinners and saved. So there's not any differentiation on the scale of your sin or what you're committing, or like whether your knowledge is enough or not. Like there's one deciding factor. There's one way, truth, and life, and it's whether or not you know Jesus Christ or not. And so it has nothing to do with where you started or where you're going or what you're practicing. So a person in a foreign culture who knows nothing of Christian culture is just as going to hell as a person over here in America who grew up in church, learned all the precepts, follows all the rules, but doesn't know Jesus. So Christianity is a very simple religion in that regard. It's not about what you do, and it's not about what you don't do. There's a single choice that's greater than a choice, because it's faith. There's a single spirit in which you can walk that is the spirit that leads to eternal life. And so I would say that it's simpler in that nature.
Don't you think that it would be immoral in some sense for a God to make it so that these people had no chance, that these people would never be reached by a missionary, God knowing that they would never be reached by any missionary, that they would be in this isolated tribe where nobody would reach, maybe because their tribe is like violent and like doesn't allow outsiders, or whatever the case may be. But
yeah,
like these isolated tribes that, no matter how small or how nuanced they are, the fact that just because they haven't been reached out to, that they're not going to hell because they didn't know any better. But you were saying it's as simple as saved and unsaved. But if they have no exposure to that and they don't really have a choice, God would still judge them to the same standard as somebody who is in America, who was raised in a Baptist family, had every opportunity to know the Lord, and they did get saved. So this guy's going to heaven because he was born in the right place, and this guy's going to hell because he was born in the wrong place. To me, that seems
not
pretty...
that last thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
So correct. I would agree with you that would not be right. And so I do not believe that that's what occurs. I do not believe that there's any person after the time of Christ who is not reached with the gospel in some way. And so if we're talking about an isolated tribe and you could prove that nobody ever made it over there, or missionaries never talked to them, or like whatever, something like that, my answer would be that in some way they receive the opportunity to know Jesus Christ, whether that is after their earthly life, whether that is in a spiritual sense, in which we believe that God knows the heart of every single person alive on earth. And so God knows whether or not, if they were brought the gospel, that they would choose to accept it or not. He's able to see what you would do years and years down the road, and what choice you would make. He knows the soft hearts and the hard hearts. He's able to see them. And so he knows whether you would ever change your mind or anything like that. And my answer is always this: if I can sit here and come up with a way in which God could save those people, then I'm with 200% confidence willing to say that God can come up with a way in which to save those people. And so my answer is that the gospel is the deciding factor for all living people everywhere, because the sacrifice of Christ is perpetual. And so in some way, the blood of Christ extends to all people, because it says for all people. And all people will have the opportunity to accept Christ or not. That is my personal belief.
Okay.
Most Christian traditions would agree with some version of that,
Sure.
except maybe the Calvinists. And so I would say that there's a bit of a Calvinist disagreement there. But I would say that no, to me, that everybody has the opportunity to encounter Christ in some way.
Okay. So you're saying that either spiritually they're encountered with a choice, or in the afterlife, are you saying that God would maybe, give them a choice to either accept him or not, like at that moment? I'm sure you might be like, you might not know exactly how it works, but like,
yes,
you just have that confidence. No. Yeah.
This is pure speculation, based on my knowledge of the God that I've met and the God that I pray to. And so it's that we don't know from the Bible directly. We know things like when Jesus descends after his crucifixion, he goes down into hell and he preaches to the spirits that are in chains. And so to some extent, I think there's some version of salvation, because if you think when Christianity started, it was like 200 people in Rome, and surely there were people all over the world during that time dying without having ever heard of this religion. And so it's my belief that God has a plan for those people, that it's not just like swept to the wayside and that they aren't just like fake people. So it's my personal belief that God has a plan and an intention for those people. So either they get to meet Christ and have the opportunity to accept him after death, or they, again, God knows, if they did continue their earthly life, and if Christians came to their region and evangelized them, he knows exactly what their heart would be, what their heart response would be.
Sure. So if somebody is just hypothetically, if there's somebody who's just completely ignorant about the gospel, completely ignorant about Christianity in general, that God would just, God would know what they would have chosen if they were reached out to, basically.
Yes. Yeah, God knows everybody.
So that kind of brings me to another interesting point, or another interesting topic, which is, if God knows everything that's going to happen, why make anything at all? Why put humans through this process of giving us this feeling of free will? I don't know if do you believe in like absolute free will, or like do you just believe in free will in general? Like you can make your own decisions? Okay.
Yes.
So why would God give us this feeling of we have free will, but he has predestined, or he has pre-planned everything that's going to happen? He knows what's going to happen. So why put us through this process when he already knows what we're going to do even before we were created or born? Like that doesn't really mentally compute with me. Obviously, as a human with logical thought and rational thought, of course, I've heard the answer of like God. There is some Christian answer that's just like, God knows, I don't, right? Where it's like God has an answer to that. I don't know the answer, which is a very perfectly intellectually honest answer. I would say that. But
sure. Yes.
That's kind of an interesting point where like I haven't really heard a satisfying answer to it, where it's like, what's the purpose? If you do believe that God has pre-planned everything, God knows what's going to happen, he knew what would happen before he created everything. So like he's kind of like he wrote the story, but then we also feel like we have a say so, or that even Christians pray hoping to change something that's going to happen when God already planned it all out, right? Unless God planned for you to pray for that. So it's a very weird, convoluted like thing where it's like, man, like I'm not really in control of my own destiny because God just planned everything out.
Yes.
And again, I'll ask, why would God do all of this just to like know that these people are going to be in heaven after the universe explodes 2 billion years later, and these people are going to go to hell, and that's just going to be it? Like, explain like the thought process if you have an explanation.
I do. And I mean, I agree that an appeal to God knows I don't is always the right answer for a Christian. But to a further extent than that, I genuinely believe that everything that God does makes sense, even if many of his ways are higher that we can't fully comprehend or understand. I think to some degree we can grasp the sense and the overall structure of what he's done. And so if what you're talking about is the case, you would say that in order for God to create this universe as he did, he would have to be certain that the ends justify the means. And so I would say that he has determined that the ends justify the means. And so your alternative would be there's only two alternatives to the option that you've said, which is, we get to participate in this. And I guess let me take a tangent really quick just to say I do believe in free will, and I do not believe in God's it's called a lot of things. I'll call it God's particular sovereignty, which means that I'm not predestined to have this interview with you necessarily. And I'm not predestined to pick up my LED remote right now and set it back down. Like, those actions aren't predestined. I have a great conversation with an open theist on my channel about this topic. It's actually really interesting, about God's involvement in your every action and that kind of stuff. And so there's lots of perspectives on that. The Calvinists, once again, are more into God's sovereignty. And so they might believe that he ordains every single action to happen. I look at it more like life is a video game. And so there is an overall story taking place, but you are a participant in it and you have agency. And, when you get in your car and drive, you can decide if you're playing Grand Theft Auto and you want to run over all the civilians. Like, that's something that you have the agency to decide to do, but it would be against the plans for the game. And so you are participating in a story, but the story is not written with every detail presupposed for you. You're participating in a role-playing game, essentially. And so there's more depth to it. And so then that weighs into my point about the ends justifying the means, which is that your two alternatives to the world being the way that it is that A, God never creates anything at all because people would end up in hell. And so then there's just nothing. And I think God, the essential determination is it's actually better if some people end up in heaven, maybe a large percentage of people. If a lot of people end up in heaven, then some people end up in hell, or most people end up in hell. It's better to God for there to be existence, and it's better to exist than not to exist. Like, this would be kind of an ultimate nihilism about the existence of the world, which is like, you would have to say to me that you believe, and I'm not saying that you believe this necessarily, but I think to be consistent on like the full atheist position that God should not have created, like to say that God should not have created the world is to step back and say, like, literally, I wish that none of this existed and it was just blackness forever. But I think that it echoes more true to me that existence is better than non-existence, and it's better that we have something than to have nothing. And people agree with this even when they, for example, decide to have children. That there's a highly likely chance that your child is going to be aborted, get hit by a car, die of cancer, experience loss and mourning and hatred and so many things can happen to your child. But most people agree that it is better to bring a child into the world than to not bring a child into the world.
Hey, I have
and so
a child.
there's sort of a willing, yes. And so you'd say, was that evil of you to do? Or do you think that it is better maybe for him to have a chance to exist than to not exist, for example? And I think most people make the determination that it is better to exist than to not exist.
I think with your point about, I'll come back to if I think my son, that whole thing. But
yeah, don't have to. I'm not trying to call you out specifically.
No. I'll go into that. But going back to existence is better than non-existence. I think as the person that is existing, I think that most humans have a drive to live, to survive. We don't know what non-existence is. All we know is our own existence, and that's why humans are so afraid of death. Is because we have. I mean. Of course, there's religions that tell you what happens after death, but in a more intellectually honest perspective is that nobody knows what happens after they die, right? Because the Muslims could be wrong about their afterlife, and it could be the Christians that are right. It could be that there's an infinite amount of possibilities about what happens after we die, even naturalistically. I've heard people talk about how your life flashes before your eyes and time stretches to such a degree in your brain that you feel like you're living forever, but your brain is actually just dying. The possibilities are endless, right? And so obviously we're going to be valuing our life in this. For me, I'm analyzing God's logic God, because I have logic, I have rationality, my presumption is that God would have something like that because he created us in his image. So I would assume that
Yes.
God has some sort of logic, some rationality, something that makes sense, at least to us humans. And of course, because God is all, the triomni God, if you believe in the triomni God, like the triomni God is incomprehensible to us because we don't know what that's like. But I would say, I would think that at least his actions, what he does, would generally fit some sort of logic or reason. I'm sure you would agree with that.
I agree.
And just analyzing his logic, not my own personal, like, I think God created us because existence is better than non-existence. But for God, he's all existing, right? He has no beginning, no end. So even before he created everything, even though it was just like Genesis says, just completely darkness, completely empty, he existed infinitely before that, theoretically. So for him to just spontaneously be like, hey, let's create a world with a bunch of people, like, and then have that world eventually end and then just have heaven forever. So he had all of forever with nothing. Then we have this, if you believe in like the Big Bang and evolution, like, 13.8 billion years from back then to however long this Earth is going to live, probably for like another, I don't remember, like 2 billion years. So I don't know, maybe like, let's just say a rough guess is like 20 billion years of existence and then just heaven forever and hell forever, right? That timeline, and let me know if you disagree with that timeline, but like, to me, that's like the most generous timeline I can give, which doesn't make sense with an infinite God. I would think that an infinite God would just have people existing forever, that the Earth wouldn't be destroyed by the sun 2 billion years later, that the Earth would just continue to have people, and he would continue having people in heaven, he'd continue having people in hell, but then that goes on forever. So like, to me, like, just as a human and analyzing the logic in that is very strange to me. And it's obviously like, if it's my head saying, if I was God, what would I do? Like, it's a very weird thing to think about. And that's why I think there is such a disagreement in my head when it comes to theism, because if I can't understand the logic of it, then it's very hard for me to believe the rest of it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And then just putting a pin in that and then talking about my son and even just like a short rabbit hole into this, just like the morality of like, because I've dove into this topic too with like, is it moral, immoral to bring people into the world? There's some people who hate children and they think that it's immoral to bring up children into the world because you're setting them up for a life of suffering and distress and anxiety and everything like that.
Yes, which is the same thing that you're saying about God, which is why I think it's important.
Yeah,
sort of.
And I'd say that just like, it's more of like a utilitarian point of view, I'd say, where it's like, yes, I'd say that bringing a child into the world, I think it also really relies heavily on their circumstances, which is weird because in like more impoverished families, I actually often have more children, which is very weird.
That is weird, isn't it?
It's very weird, and I know there's an explanation for that I don't have at the top of my head, but they have the most children, which means that most children that are born live a worse life than most children that are comparatively, utilitarianly speaking, to a rich kid's children who lives on to have a very wealthy life. Even if they like die of drugs when they're 25, they probably would have a comparatively better life. Like, if you're looking at just the value monetarily of like, they get to eat the best food, they get to have the fanciest cars, they go to a great private school, they have all this success in life, even if they die of a drug overdose at 30, then this kid who most likely will live their entire lives impoverished, where they'll graduate with a high school degree, get maybe one of them works in a trade, and they live like a lower to middle class job for the rest of their lives, have a couple kids, and then some of them get even worse. They make bad decisions, they go homeless and stuff like that. So and for me, I have my kid. You know, I work a pretty decent job. My fiance does as well, and my kid, my child is living a pretty good life. He's very happy. We spend a lot of time with him. Like me and my fiance get a ton of happiness just from having a child, and I'm sure our child is very happy as well. So, and of course he gets into, he's 1 year old, a little over 1 year old now. And of course he gets into he gets his bumps and scrapes. He, hurts himself. He falls on his butt. Like things happen, but I'd say the happiness that he gets from us as his parents far outweighs the negativity that he's going to experience in life. That's me predicting the future, but I'm confident that we'll give him a good life, at least when he's 18.
Yes.
After he's 18 or whenever he moves out, his life is his own. I don't have responsibility for that. Hopefully I just raise him the right way. But so I'd say that in some cases, I'd say it is actually maybe immoral for parents to have children if they are in such a bad spot in life. I wouldn't say they should be law, but I'm saying if I looked at a family and I said, man, they have 6 kids and they're just all unhappy. Some of them have no shirts on. I don't know, just whatever the case may be, where it just seems like they're living an unhappy life, and then they continue to have kids after that. For me, that I have some moral qualms with that. I'd say you're intentionally or unintentionally giving this child a worse life for whatever reason. And maybe that reason's a good reason. I don't know, but I just wanted to go on that a little bit because I do think there is a point there where it's there is a sense of, if that child, which is why I brought it up, because God has knowledge of everything and he knows what's going to happen in the future. So he knows that he's creating this child that he, allowed to be born in, a Middle Eastern country that accidentally steps on an IED and blows himself up in 2. God knew that was going to happen before he was born. So to me, that's kind of the same idea, where for us humans, we can't tell them don't have kids because they're going to raise up to be a bad person. We can't say that because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But for me, if I think about God is all-knowing, so he knows what's going to happen, and I can't bring myself to understand how God could have knowledge that all these children are going to die painful deaths, or all these people in general are going to die horrible, painful deaths, and say that this somehow makes sense, or this is a good thing to let a child grow up, not only the pain for the child, but also the pain for the family and the parents and everything like that. But there's also a moral qualm with that, which is why I brought it up, because there's a very weird idea of him being all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving, because I think that triune God is I have issues with that as well. But anyways, so there's 2 points with I think it's mostly, I think it's okay to have children, especially if you treat them the right and you kind of prepare for it and know that you're giving them a good life. And
there's some really, really good stuff sprinkled in there, I think. And actually, I think your 2 points are essentially the same point, at least how I'm reading them. So the first thing I would say is, to go backwards, is that you're talking a lot about circumstances. And I would just say that I think circumstances are very temporary, and that's going to lead into my larger point here. But so if you say a poor family shouldn't have kids, they might not be poor forever. The circumstances might change, all of those kind of things that people would tell you. I also happen to know a lot of families who have lots of children and who are in poverty, and I think those kids are woefully happy. And so it's not clear to me that being rich is better than being poor necessarily. I would actually state that as an outright fact, because we're talking about circumstances. So once again, so it's not necessarily better to live in most people are going to say it's better to live in your house than to live in a van. But if somebody lives in a van and they want to have kids, I'm not willing to condemn that person, because I think that's why circumstances change.
That's why I said monetarily, or utilitarian, the kid just being impoverished in general is less likely to lead to happiness than the rich kid who has everything going for him. They might be a little bit more happy with the monetary value inherently, but obviously that, there's a lot of problems with being a rich kid, with like your parents being busy all the time, you don't have a relationship with them.
Sure.
You're probably more likely to get into drugs, stuff like that. So I understand there's nuance there, but I was just saying, like, monetarily in general, like,
yes,
I'd say that there is more likely to be happy people that are like happy with their lives than people
yes.
who are raised in like an impoverished like family, or like an impoverished like city or environment or whatever.
So you're appealing to the happiness of the child as being worth bringing them into existence, essentially. You're saying if a child is reasonably going to live a happy life, then it is also reasonable to bring them into existence.
That's the utilitarian view. Yeah. That I'm not saying that that's
so like mostly.
my I'd say there's a lot of things that go into it. I'd say that you do have to think about, at least for me, that's what I think about. I think about, if I didn't think I was ready to have children, I wouldn't have children. Right?
Sure.
I wouldn't think about, I want to be a dad, so I'm just going to have a child, and not think about the circumstances that I'm in.
Right. That would be selfish. Yes.
Right. And I'd say that's selfish, and that's why I say it would be immoral for parents to have a child when they're not ready, which is kind of what I mean.
Sure.
Because if you're not ready, then you're more likely to bring a child into a bad situation than if you are ready. Like, I'd say the ideal, not to say that this is the rule, but the ideal is a married couple having kids after they're married.
Of course, yes.
The nuclear family.
And all Christians would agree with you.
I agree. I mean, obviously, I'm more liberal. Like, I don't have like the Christian view of like no sex before marriage, blah blah blah. I don't, subscribe to that. But I do think that, like, for somebody to have the most success in life, I do think that that is the smartest thing to do, right? If somebody decides to have that before they're married, I say still look at your circumstances, right? Because before you're married, you can still have successful careers. You can still, have enough money to provide for a family, right? You can still have that even though you're not married. Marriage is just, in my perspective, marriage is just a marriage license, but it does have a deeper meaning. But if, like, no matter if they're married or not, mostly I just look at the circumstances that the parents are in and how that would affect the child in the future,
Yes. So the goal is for the child to have a good life, basically. Maybe not even a happy life, because happiness is also temporary, but a good life is something that we're looking for from just a pure utilitarian perspective. It might be worth bringing a child into existence if that child is going to have a good life. And if you can say with pretty high degree of certainty that you're going to give a child, there's always the risk of bad things happening, but like a pretty high degree of certainty.
I agree.
So I would say that that's a very small version of the determination that God is making, for example. And so you made the point when you were talking about, I think you said your son, and you said that, we make him happy and he makes us happy. And I know that I can continue to make him happy, and that he gets, bumps and cuts and bruises, but he has an overall happy life. And I would say that God views our existence on earth very similarly to that, because if you think about, you're determining that it might be worth, like, I won't characterize you absolutely, but it might be worth bringing someone into existence if they can have a good life. And so I would say, how much more is it worth bringing someone into existence if they can have eternal life, which is what God offers. And so he would say that, again, what I would go back to is that the ends justify the means. The ends are that those who choose love get eternal life. And so you get to spend eternal life in love. Love is also the reason. So that's sort of important, because I think back, a couple points ago, we were talking about like what is the reason why God would choose to bring existence into meaning. So it's not just that existence is better than non-existence. It's that existence brings with it love, and love is the reason for everything that God created. And so it is in his ordination better for love to exist than nothing to exist. And in order for love to exist, you also have to have free will and free choice, because love is a choice. And if he just created people who are happy all the time, there would be no choice, for example, or robots, there would be no choice, for example. And so love prerequisites free will, and love is also the reason for everything being created. And so to me, it is a logical procession, the same logical decision that parents are making when they have children, but on a way grander scale. God saying that, like, yes, lots of bad things are going to happen to lots of good people. And in the end, because you also made the point about in your mind all things would just be eternal, which I actually think that they are. Earth is eternal, heaven is eternal, and hell is eternal. All things are eternal. The earth is not going to be destroyed, in my view. That's a bit of a difference that I have. And so all things are going to be made eternal, all souls are eternal, and because everything exists forever, it's better for good and loving things to exist forever, even in the midst of bad and evil things also existing forever. And I would say that's the determining factor, because it's either that or nothing. And I also believe that it is the only way that God could have done it. Not all Christians would go that far, but I would go so far as to say that it makes, to me, complete sense the way that God chose to do things, and that it is in fact the only way that you can get the outcome that he wanted, which is souls loving eternally in heaven. And the only way to accomplish that is the way in which it was executed. And so if you wanted that outcome, love, that's the reason for him being eternal but deciding to create, is because he had love within himself as the Trinity, but he thought it would be better if there were beings for whom which he could share it with. And so he makes the determination that it would be better for that to exist than for it to not exist. And then there's only one path forward, which is the path that we're on and the trajectory that we're on. That is my personal belief.
So is there a difference between the one path trajectory and the video game analogy that you used earlier, where it's like God has one way in the highway, but there's also a video game where it's like we can also make our own decisions that that don't affect God's plan, because God's plan is like an overarching like goal.
Yes.
Those two things don't really
it is
mesh together.
Goal. Yes, so it would be a video game that, like any video game, you can win it, and the circumstances by which you win it are unique, of course, in video games, in that you have to be completely and entirely selfless and give up your life to a cause that you don't fully understand, and make use of things like faith, hope, and love, which is difficult. But the video game allows for choice. And so you're not mandated to win it. You can choose God or not God. And it's not, I would not say that it's as simple as like Pascal's wager, just choosing like hell or heaven. It is a relationship, and it's about love, and it's about fruition, and it's about furthering those things.
Okay. So going back to the, for us having children analogy, imagine if us humans had God's pre-knowledge of things, right?
Yes.
If me and my fiance, or, whenever we get married or whatever, whenever we decide we want another kid, if we had the foreknowledge to be like, if we have this child right now, that child will contract bone cancer and die when they're 3 and suffer a painful, terrible death. I would say that I would most likely think that we would decide to not have that child. Because not only would the ends justify the means, because, we'd be happy to have a child, but we'd also be extremely, extremely sad that this child, we know for sure, will die of bone cancer when they're 3 years old. They will not live a full life. They will not get to enjoy everything that life gives you. They won't get married. They won't have their first crush. They won't have their first kiss. Nothing. They won't have any of that. They'll only have 3 years of being a baby / toddler. Then they'll die. And I'd argue that, well, I'm not gonna say that. I was going to say it would be immoral to. I was going to say it would be immoral to have that child, but I don't want to prescribe morality to everybody.
We could say it might.
I would say it might be. I might say that it's immoral for everybody. If they all had to come to that decision, I'd say it'd be immoral for everybody to choose to have that child, and that's why I think it's immoral for God to know that all these children in the entire world, past, present, and future, will die in some sort of way, probably more painful than bone cancer, probably earlier than 3 years old, that won't live a fulfilling life, but will also die a horrible, painful death for nothing. Because those parents will have just those short years of happiness, then they'll have that tragedy carried with them for the rest of their lives. And in my opinion, that would cause more harm than good, which I don't think is a moral thing for a God to do.
That's an interesting point.
What would you think about that?
So I would make 2 rebuttals to that. First, that first to the second thing, that it would not cause more harm than good, in my view, actually. And to understand that, I think you would need to talk to Christian people who've been through grief. And when you talk to Christian people who maintain their belief through like losing children and losing like the hardest things that you can lose in this life, then you come to have a Christian understanding of grief and how God can make miraculous things happen through things that we think are quite bad. But it also requires, in rebuttal to the first point, it requires the recognition that existence is not just those 3 years of happiness, that it is beyond that and is in fact eternal. So if you took the same illustration and said that you knew having this child would mean that they would have to suffer through bone cancer, but you also knew that that child would wake up in the greatest paradise imaginable, and that they would be able to be then happy, fulfilled, and in love with existing forever and always with no end in sight. And you knew that that's what they were getting, then it would not be even close to obviously moral that you should not have that child. In fact, you would make the argument that it might be better to have that child so that they could obtain that end goal. And that's essentially the point that I'm making.
Sure. In that specific circumstance, I think that would be subject to personal opinion, whether or not you would want that child, you would be okay with that child suffering for however long they have bone cancer to get that eternal glory. But then whenever you apply that to people like me or people like other atheists that were born, we have our lives where some of us had Christian influences, some of us didn't. Some people were born in other countries who have religious influence. And you could say we made our own choices in that. But God, knowing that we would eventually go to hell for all eternity, which I'd say is probably, in my opinion, is very immoral punishment, because I know there's been Christian arguments saying that like you're sinning against an eternal God, that's why there's an eternal punishment. I've heard that argument before. That's not very satisfying for me, because I'd say there is a temporary life where you could commit the most heinous crimes imaginable, and maybe all that could. If you look at it like, I know you said that like every sin looks the same to God. I know that's like a biblical principle, but if it were me, obviously, because I'm pretty sure there is like certain sins are like a little bit worse than others. There's like the what is it called? There's the unforgivable sin, things like that. Yeah, isn't that like cursing the Holy Spirit or something?
Yes, there's a lot of debate about what exactly that means.
Yeah, but and so for me, if I was thinking like, what would I do? How would I make this a little bit more moral in my moral like perspective? I'd say that like every sin does have a certain level of like, certain level of atrocity to it, or a certain level of like evil to it. So like somebody who did white lies, who what are some other sins? Someone who like stole a couple candy bars from the store, someone who had angry outbursts throughout their life, that same person goes to the same hell as somebody who was a serial killer, or somebody who cheated on their wife for 30 years, or someone who did all these, culturally worse, heinous crimes or immoral things than somebody who did some pretty, in cultural terms, very light or moderate sins. They go to the same hell. Yes. And I've heard of the explanation that there's like levels to hell, there's like worse levels, like higher levels, things like that. Which I'd say that like even the very top level would be the worst pain you could ever even fathom. And the bottom level is still the worst pain you can fathom, but somehow they're just different. But
yes.
But I think that obviously if I were God, if I had to make a more moral system, I'd prescribe a certain time to each sin that you commit in your life, and you don't accept Christ. And to me, that would be infinitely more moral to say, hey, this person gets 100 years in, the person who did these light to moderate sins gets 100 years in hell, and this person who did like the most heinous crimes imaginable, the most immoral things imaginable, they get, 200,000, 2 million, 2 billion years in hell. But they do get out eventually, because, that's how our justice system works in real life, right? And they were Christians who established them using their own moral compass, who said, punishment fits the crime, right? Punishment fits the
Yes.
crime. You committed a murder. Depending on the type of murder, you get 50 years, 70 years, or life in prison or the death penalty. Because,
Yes.
or, you could even say that God could choose to be an annihilationist, where you just like, boom, out of existence forever, because you don't deserve to get to heaven eventually because of all the crimes you did. He could do that too.
Yes.
But maybe it's just because I have a bias because I'm used to this justice system that I've been raised in. But I do think that, morally, I think that is infinitely more of a moral system of punishment than having infinite hell and infinite torture forever because you sinned against an infinite God. And that feeling that God and his actions throughout the Bible and in the logic of his like decisions makes me feel like, the God of the Bible isn't as perfectly moral whenever you compare it to, my morality, which is how I can, make my decisions.
Sure. That's well reasoned, and I can understand why you would reason that way. And it's even a reasonable conclusion. And there might be tiers to hell or something like again, it's a lot of stuff that we don't have information about. But let me make you what I think is a more clear point of the Bible, because you're pointing out that the person who lied to their grandma and the person who stole the candy bars and the person who cheated on their wife and the person who was a serial killer are all in hell in the same place. But contrary-wise, the message of the Christian tradition is that the person who lied to their grandma and the person who stole the candy bars and the person who cheated on their wife and the person who was a serial killer are also all in heaven, because it's only one determination that makes the difference. And again, it's not about what you did. It's not about actions in either direction. It's not about actions down, and it's not about actions up. There is one determining factor, and it is the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And the knowledge of Jesus Christ allows a serial killer to obtain the same eternal paradise as a person who did wonderful things their entire life and never stole a candy bar once. And that's just as unfair as the whole hell thing. And Jesus talks about the heaven thing because that's almost harder for believers to grasp, to say like, I dedicated my whole life to this, and yet the person who got here last gets the same reward as me. And so to me, that's just God's consistency on both sides. There is being for Christ and there is being against Christ, and both of them reap the same consequences: eternal reward or eternal damnation. It's not about the actions. A murderer misses Christ just as much as a church-going grandmother who is, loving and kind and all of those things misses Christ. There is only one thing to miss, and there's only one thing to get. That is what sets Christianity aside. You're talking about all these religions and all these options. There's no religion like Christianity in that retrospect, that there is one thing, there is one exact thing, there is no amount of actions, there is one exact thing, which is following Christ or not following Christ, which makes the determination of your eternal soul.
Okay, to me, that directly contradicts the way Christians describe God as being all just and all merciful. I think that is a direct contradiction, because obviously mercy and justice are on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to determining whether somebody deserves something, right? Because being all just says punishment fits the crime. I'd say that justice is that innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
I think the way that us humans have defined justice is more or less similar to how God defines justice, which is like, you get what you deserve, for generally speaking. Not like you punch someone in the face, you get punched back. Like not in that general speaking, but like in the strict form of justice, maybe like eye for an eye, tooth. I think Jesus said that in the Bible. But that's being all just, and that's how people describe God. And then they say he's all merciful, and then they start bringing up the gospel and that like you can do all the heinous crimes in the world, but as soon as you accept Christ and you start repenting and changing your ways and being transformed, then you get to go to heaven, even though you've done all these terrible things in your life in the past. And that is, I would say, that is being all merciful, saying that like, no matter what you've done, I forgive you of every heinous thing you've ever done, as long as you follow me and promise and determined to do your best and to repent of your sins and to walk and follow Jesus. That is being all merciful. And in the Old Testament, God is that all just God, right? There are commandments, which I think are immoral. There are commandments where God says if a child is disobedient or rebellious against their parents, you should take them out of the city and stone them to death. Which is I don't know what kind of justice that is, but it's very strict, barbaric kind of justice where it's like, you did this bad thing and you're going to experience very harmful punishments for it. So you have these two types of, morals. I guess they're not really morals. They're more just like ways of determining if somebody deserves something. And you talk about the ever-loving mercy of God, but then I'm pointing out, well, where's the justice? Where's the justice of sending somebody to the infinite hell and torture for doing temporary finite things on earth, where you have this one video game test, and if you do some bad stuff, but you don't also win the game, then you are thrown in hell and tortured forever through the most painful experience you could ever imagine. But then that same person who committed all those sins, like I've said before, and they actually did end up winning. They ended up going to heaven.
Yes.
That to me is not the all just. That is not justice. That is mercy. But when you try to define God as all just and all mercy, I feel like that's a contradiction. Does that make sense?
I can see where you're coming from. So what would you say mercy requires on the part of the person to whom mercy would be given?
I'd say probably compassion. If I think of being merciful to someone, of course there's love.
If a person,
you have to have love for someone, but
okay, imagine you're in the courtroom scenario and a murderer is appearing before the judge. In order for the judge to have mercy on the murderer, what would the murderer need to do?
They'd probably have to. They'd have to probably tug at the heartstrings a little bit, to be honest. They probably have to. Probably showcase a lot of remorse and regret for what they did to even earn some of that. Of course, that doesn't always work. But it also depends on how heinous your crime is. No serial killer is going to get mercy from a judge because that person has showcased a severe lack of, no matter how much they beg and plead, everybody's just going to assume that that's fake because nobody that commits that heinous of a crime is going to just suddenly turn around and have a completely different change of heart. That almost never happens. Of course, you can point out the very select few people who actually had that, but overwhelmingly, that severe case, they're not going to get much of any mercy at all, no matter how much they beg and plead, because we're not going to just let that slide, right? Yes. There are cases where police pull over some guy who went 20 over the speed limit. And then they're like, they got their kid in the back. They are like, oh, my kid has to go to the bathroom so bad. I was speeding to the gas station. They're like, okay, shoot, go do what you got to do. But then, let's say my dad can get pulled over because he's just on his way home. And, he gets a ticket from a cop who doesn't have as much mercy as the other one. So you can't just because mercy is variant upon the person and on earth.
Yes.
Right? Yes. So you can be as sorry and repentant as you want. I'll say, I swear I'll never do it again. But sometimes that doesn't work. That doesn't happen. Yes.
But I'm using it in the God analogy because for him to be all merciful, there is something required there. You're saying that it requires, I would say, repentance, a penitent heart is what mercy requires, because otherwise you're doled out the judgment as you please. And this, there's sort of a separate conversation here on sin, which is the wages of sin is death. So that's Paul's point about all sins being equal, and therefore you get the same punishment from all of them. And that's sort of important to this. But to understand how God can be all justice and all mercy is to understand exactly what Jesus accomplished. So he's all mercy because the repentant get a savior. And so he's merciful to everyone who accepts the savior. And then he's all justice because that debt is paid. And so if you're a serial killer but you accept Christ, now you imagine that Jesus walks into the courtroom as your lawyer and says to the judge, I'll go to jail instead if you only let him out. And in fact, I'll go to jail for everybody that you have ever for all time. And so that's the merciful message of Christ, is that he will take the punishment, therefore allowing God's justice. Now, there's some debate about that as well, but I believe that that's true. In some sense, Christ satisfies. Sure. Yes, Christ satisfies God's justice so that he can be all justice and all mercy. So merciful through Christ and justice through Christ so that he can do both of those things. But back to the sin thing. I still
wouldn't like describe that as justice, though. I would still describe that as
why wouldn't
mercy,
it be justice?
Because justice is
but that's the point,
right?
Yes, correct. But that's also the message of the gospel, is that nobody deserves anything. And that was another point that I made in the video, which is like, nobody deserves anything and nothing you can do can merit it. Like, you can live as good as you want your whole life. This is what the gospel is the undoing of. It's the undoing of this mindset. This is the hardest thing for humans to grasp, is to understand that even if I'm nice to people all the time and I'm doing my best, like, I'm still going to go home and I'm going to have selfish inclinations. I'm going to want to do things just for me, and I'm not going to want to be for the other people. And God is saying that is a shortcoming. So sin is an archery term. I'm sure you might be aware of this, but like, it just means missing the mark. And so that's why there's no degree of sin, because there's just the bullseye and then there's everything else. And if you've sinned, if you get hit anywhere else, it doesn't matter how close. There is one path and one way forward, as I've made the point several times throughout this conversation. Sure. And so the point would be, like, heaven is a place for people who selflessly love. That is the reason for existence, is selfless love. Selfless love can only be learned through sacrifice, and it's represented in the acceptance of Jesus as Savior. It's essentially the only way that you can atone for the fact that you are not a selfless lover. Nobody is a selfless lover. They will always secretly do things for themselves, make decisions for themselves, make a decision that's going to benefit them. They might lie and steal, depending on the circumstances, to get the better outcome in their life. Because if you believe that life is, only 60 years long, and you only get to do whatever you do during that period of time, then yeah, you're going to make those decisions for yourself. And so obviously a person who does that can't be in heaven, because heaven is a place for selfless lovers. And so the only way that you can be reconciled to that place is if somebody atones for your sin and says, I'll take the judgment. Everybody deserves the judgment, but I will atone for those who are willing to accept it. And that's where, but the mercy requisite comes in. So you have to accept it. You have to say, I believe that this man has paid on my behalf, because otherwise it isn't everybody going to two different paths. It's everybody going to the same place, but some people get there and they say, this guy agreed to take the sentence for me. And you either have that guy who agreed to take the sentence for you, or you do not. So that would be the perspective.
Okay. I think there's just a disconnect with the rationality between, like, the having all mercy, which is the all mercy is Jesus taking your place, right? That is the merciful act.
Yes.
Jesus saying, okay, you accepted me, so now, I'll take your place and you can go to heaven, and I'll take your punishment or whatever. I understand that part. That part is clear to me. But if I try to bring this down to an earthly scenario where it's like, I'm just going to use an extreme example because those always work.
Sure.
Let's just say, Hitler's on trial. He didn't kill himself.
Yes.
He didn't kill himself. He, let's say he went to court. He was, whatever the biggest court. I think there's a certain court, with the EU or whatever. He's taken up. He's charged with war crimes, charged for the murder of 6+ million Jews and everything like that. And let's just say hypothetically that he did, confess his life to Jesus. He did repent. He did say, man, maybe he bumped into this priest, in jail while they were holding him. This priest went to him and explained him the gospel and explained that, man, what you did was terrible, and that you destroyed all these people, blah, blah, blah. Let's just say he had a fully heartfelt, repentant heart, and that God accepted his, and God accepted him and everything like that. To me, it's still not justice for Jesus to come and say, hey, this guy repented, I'll take your place. After all of the insanely heinous things that he did, compared to like I said before, compared to some guy who did pretty much ordinary sins, or like culturally like ordinary sins, things that like you would probably wouldn't even get arrested for, versus Hitler, who everybody kind of describes as like the worst person imaginable in the history of Earth, right?
Sure.
To
Yes.
me, people like him and people who are similar to him generally, where they've done heinous crimes, where they've killed people, where they've, raped people, whatever the case may be. The fact that they have this get out of jail free card, where they have this, it's not that they intend, because I know that they have to have the intent of repentance, not the intent of getting out of hell, right? Like you have to have that like
Yes.
intention. I understand that, but like in
Yes.
God's eyes, that would still be justice, because you are like switching out Jesus's life for Hitler's. But
Yeah.
obviously to me and a lot of people, if you gave them that scenario, don't say it's Jesus, say it's like some other guy who just said like, hey, I'll take his place. Nobody on earth would think that's justice. Outside of a Christian perspective,
Correct.
Nobody would
Yes.
ever call that justice. But
Yes.
for some reason, whenever you put God in the seat of the judge and you put Jesus in the seat of the replacement, then all of a sudden it becomes justice, because they're different
Yes.
people. And that just doesn't, it's the same exact scenario, but it's just swapped out by God and Jesus. And
Yes.
Christians see that as justice. And me replacing those as people who aren't Jesus and God, that is absolutely not justice. And it looks like Jesus, or it looks like Hitler got away scot-free and continues to do whatever he wants to do and live a free, happy life, while he just destroyed all these families and all these, he destroyed the Europe basically.
Sure.
And he gets away scot-free, where he gets to go and back to the real analogy, which is he gets to go to heaven eternally, while people like me, or people like other people who, didn't sin as much, not even close to as much, like did pretty small sins, would have to go to hell forever. Like to me, that just does not compute as justice at all. I understand the all mercy part.
Sure.
That would be, the judge would have infinite mercy on Hitler for letting him go, for sure. But not only is that not justice in the legal sense, it's also not justice for all the victims that he inflicted harm to. So I think that's just where the disconnect is, where I just can't understand how that is justice while also being completely merciful. I think that's just something that I'll have to think on and try to I think also, on another side note, I think that only intellectual exercises, I think you point this out in the video, only intellectual exercises don't get you to Jesus. I fully admit that. Because, like I said, I think that the big driving force of Christianity and religions in general is the emotional appeal and the emotional drive to want that, not because it makes sense completely if you like analyze it, but because it makes you, it makes sense emotionally. It makes sense like in your heart, right? And I think that's the difference. So I'll say that, knowing that like I can't just like go after and just like think about everything and be like, does that logically make any sense? Like, and then it'll just like click and be like, oh, it does make logical sense. Like it won't, I know it won't happen like that, but like I think the process of just like working it out intellectually, and once I can't think of any like intellectual problems, then eventually it could happen where like I just like put that intellectual part aside and then like go through like the heart process or whatever. It could happen in the future. I am open to being a Christian in the future if it comes. I don't know how it's going to come. Kind of like how Christians ask like, well, what evidence would convince you that God is real? I'm like, heck if I know. Like, I have no idea.
There is none.
I don't know if any evidence, if it exists, would convince me. If it does exist, then I hope it comes sometime soon, because if there is evidence that would like prove conclusively that the Christian God exists and that I should follow it, then I would I would accept that because then that would make sense. But since that
Yep.
may never or will never happen, like
Will never.
But of course there's like that intellectual part of me where it's like, if God is supposed to be rational and logical, you should be able to get to him through rational and logical means. But I know a lot of Christians don't believe that. So it's weird. Like, I don't think that, because I think that it's generally not a good thing to lean on your emotions through life, especially when you're making important decisions. I think that you have to kind of like, there's a lot of analogies about this, but like if I told you that this big metal box that's sealed, like welded, and I told you that there's like tiny little elephant inside, you wouldn't just take that as fact. Even if I showed you this 1,000-year-old book that said like, yeah, I saw this elephant, I'm the one who put it in there, and it's still alive. Like this is an immortal elephant that's just in here. And I told you, and you're like, oh, it's kind of heavy. I kind of give you the car salesman, like, oh, there's so many like different things that like point to that fact, but it just wouldn't make sense in your head because there's nothing in reality that shows that could be possible, right? And so that's the approach that I have with Christianity or religion in general, is that when I look around, there's nothing in life that strongly points to the possibility that God exists or that Christianity is true. There's a lot of emotional appeal, which I respect. Like if you have a strong conviction that God's real, even if I don't agree with it, I respect it. Like I can't tell you that you're wrong, but I can't take that as proof that God exists. I have to have that proof for myself. You know what I mean?
Sure. I understand your hurdle. Like I obviously, I'm also I'm a thinking person. I'm a critical thinker. I'm an intellectual person. And I had that same thing. Like you want logical answers to your questions. And one of the hardest things about faith is that you have to accept that they come after. The answers to your questions come after making a heart decision. And that's not just like a little thing for funsies. Like that is the message, again, part of the message of Christianity. Because going back to your point about justice, God is telling you that there's something more important than even justice, even against the most divine being worthy of justice in all of nature. And that thing is selfless love. And again, that is the meaning of existence. And so there's a reason why nobody else could take the sins of a person like, Hitler or whoever it is, and it wouldn't be just. But there's two reasons why it would be just if it was God and Jesus. First, because God is not picking someone random. He's sending his only son. So now you imagine that the judge brings in his child son, who he's more proud of and loves more than anything in the earth, and is willing to put it in front and say, I would rather he go to jail than you go to jail because I want you to be redeemed and I want things to go better for you. And I think that that's way more powerful than justice. First, on the first hand, imagine that happening. That is powerful, selfless love that is so insane that it doesn't even seem just to us. We're like, no, that's not just. Like you see this with people willing to forgive murderers, we see that and we say that's not justice, but it is. It's more than that. It's selfless love. It is when you genuinely want better for every person around you, no matter what they did and no matter the person. And so it's open to everyone. But then it has to additionally be the case that that person is Jesus Christ and that the judge is God, because the God demands a ultimate penalty. And Jesus Christ is the only sinless person. The only person who doesn't deserve to go to jail for anything is the only person who can take the penalties of everybody who does deserve to go for everything. And so I think it's a lot more powerful than justice. It's showing you that the reason that you're alive is to understand selfless love. That is the reason. That is what you're here to get. And that is what wins heaven. The point of heaven is to have a place full of people who selflessly love. That is literally the intention, the primary thing that we're meant to learn.
Sure. And I think I think that point where it's like, I didn't even ask you if you believe that God was all just and all merciful. I know you, like in your description, you tried to meld them kind of together. I think for me, because that logically doesn't make sense, that immediately it makes me like doubt. But if there was a circumstance or somebody who told me like, I don't think God is all just because he's all merciful.
Yeah.
I think that would make more sense in my head, because I've told people this before. I've told people that if I was a Christian, I'd be the weirdest Christian you've ever met. Yeah. Because it's not like the Jefferson Bible where I would like take everything out of the Bible that's God and supernatural and just like use that. I would if I was a Christian, I'd believe in God, but I would definitely have my own very weird, very interesting perspective on it because I do think the way I do. Like, I probably wouldn't believe that God was all just and all merciful because it doesn't make sense to me, you know. And I wouldn't believe in. I probably would be. I keep trying to say abolitionist. Where where you like get destroyed instead of go to hell. I keep forgetting that word.
Oh, an annihilationist. Yes.
Annihilationist, yeah. So I probably believe in that because I would say that's more moral than being tortured forever. So there's things like that where, like, if I was a Christian, I definitely would have a very interesting set of beliefs, I'd say, because I do think the way they do, and I do have the moral compass that I do, and that if I wanted to believe in a God, and if I believe that a God existed, obviously, I think every Christian does this. I think that they apply their own moral compass to God. I personally believe that. And there are Christians who read the Bible and they apply their own moral compass to the verses that they read. And that's why they believe they do, which is why they have so many, why they have so many denominations of Christianity out there, because all these people are applying their own moral compass based on their own personal experience and altering the meaning of the verses to accompany their moral belief.
Yes.
Which is why you have liberal Christians who, are okay with abortion, and you have most Christians who are against it, right? Because the people who are okay with abortion or are pro-choice, who are also Christian, they have their own moral compass, and they try to read the Bible in that lens, right? Which is why I don't think the Bible is as absolute as people say it is. People can say it's perfect, and we won't get into like the imperfections, like the contradictions in the verses.
That's another story. Yeah,
that is a very big, long story. But just the fact that like people can extract so many different moral beliefs and opinions on it, also to me it points out to the fact that that not everybody claiming to be a Christian is a Christian. Not everybody claiming to know what the Bible means is, knows what it means. I don't think we can have a perfect definition of the Bible. I don't think we can have
100%.
a part, even though technically there is, because God has an intention for how the Bible is read. But us as humans, we have no idea how it's supposed to be read because all of us have different opinions on it.
Yes. Let me just I just want to say quick, because we got to get you out of here, but sure. You're absolutely right. I would say that not all Christians are Christian. That's the first important thing to get. And that differences in opinion is not what you're joining when you become a Christian. So becoming a Christian doesn't mean joining a church. It means following Jesus Christ and putting your faith in him. And so you're going to see lots of differences, and you're going to see lots of denominations, and you're going to see lots of people with flaws, and you're going to see lots of people making mistakes. But that doesn't represent Christianity. I wish there was better representations. I wish people were working harder and doing the best that they could. But a lot of what you see is going to be falsehood and all of that kind of stuff. And all we can do is hope and pray for that to get better. But I feel like it's a good thing for you to know that joining Christianity isn't joining a club of people. It's single savior, and the club of people are doing their best to come after him. And so a lot of beliefs are flexible, but you'll notice that there's some core tenets. You have to believe in the selfless love of Christ, sacrificed in the name of God the Father across all variations. Beyond that, we can talk about everything else. I think there's clear answers for a lot of it, and a lot of Christians are just missing it or misled, but I do think that there's one solid point. That's how I would just want to end on saying it's about accepting one solid point.
And I do have one more question, because I have...
Do you have time?
Yeah, I do have time. I have a little bit of wiggle room. Okay. But one thing that I actually told myself I would ask everybody before I talked to them about religion that I forgot to, is I've encountered a lot of Christians in my life who seem to not only reject, but also resent the idea that they could be wrong about what they believe. And take my dad, for instance. My dad, I've talked to him because you can kind of assume that my whole family was very shocked about my deconversion and my label to be atheist, or saying that I'm an atheist. And I've had a lot of conversations with them about it. And every time that I tried to like pinpoint this point that like you could be wrong about something, you could be wrong that God, either your God doesn't exist or that no supernatural beings exist. I've tried again. I had this conversation with him probably like 3 or 4 times, where I tried to get him just to admit that he could be wrong about something, or not about something, but like about his religion, about his belief in God. But he refused. He would say, "I won't let you destroy my faith."
Yes.
He would say that verbatim. And because I think that faith in general is not a good thing, in my opinion. Because, and especially blind faith, which you could debate whether or not Christian faith is blind faith or not, because faith is a Bible describing faith, where it's like faith in things not seen, things like that. Or like the things that, you know, believing in things not seen, or, you know, the things that you're basically hoping for. You're hoping that it's true, basically. And to me, a vehement belief in something that doesn't have evidence supporting it, like of course you have your own personal psychological or like personal connection with God, where you have like this emotional, you know, like connection to him, you have the spiritual connection that you feel. But whenever, you know, to kind of quote a right-wing person, Ben Shapiro, he says, "Fact doesn't care about your feelings."
Yeah. Where
it's like, of course that's a political thing, but
sure,
applying that to just a general rule for life. I've never liked just believing something without having sufficient evidence, right?
Me neither.
So for me, whenever I would talk to my dad or talk to other Christians, where at the end of the conversation, whenever we'd get to like a stopping point, or we get to like a point where we just can't agree, they would always say, "You just gotta have faith, man. You just gotta have faith. You just gotta take that leap of faith. Even though it doesn't make sense, you just gotta take the leap." And if I try to apply that to every other situation in my life, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd probably be on the street, because I would have faith in my gambling abilities. I would have faith in my ability to drive off a cliff. I don't know, just random examples of like, if somebody has such a strong faith in anything without having sufficient evidence, just like people who believe in flat Earth, there is mountains of evidence against a flat Earth, but there are people who vehemently believe it.
Yes.
Why? Why do they believe it? Because they've been convinced that they've been believed that they could. They honestly probably have faith that the Earth is flat. They probably feel like they have sufficient evidence, but at the end they have faith because they're hoping that what's real, like what they believe, is actually real, instead of relying on what the evidence says and letting that point to their conclusion. So with faith, I feel like faith is believing something without having like the evidence, without having the things that actually point to it, other than your own spiritual or emotional connection to it.
Yes.
So that's why I ask people who I talk to, I ask them, "Do you think you could be wrong about this, and would you change your mind if you came to some sort of conclusion, either intellectual, or eventually you get to a point where maybe you've seen so much bad thing, like so many bad things." There's Christians who have deconverted because their child died. Of course, there's been Christians who have turned to Christians or have become stronger Christians because their child died, but they also have deconverted or stopped believing in God because, there's different people out there. But all that to say, do you think that if you somehow were presented or had the feeling that God might not be true, would you encourage that, or would you kind of like, would you kind of just stuff it, or like put it to the side because of whatever reason?
We could have an entire conversation about faith.
Sure,
and maybe we should in the future, because it's a heavily misunderstood topic within Christianity.
Sure.
It is more complicated than blind faith for certain. Sure. And I just want to say that, like, I mean, it's hard to know every Christian's perspective and whether they're just being stubborn. And I do think that it's a good thing as Christians to be more understanding of different perspectives. But if you're speaking with a good Christian, they should not tell you that they are willing to change their mind, because it is an unshakable faith, and it's deeper than just feeling and emotion. It's hard to describe unless you experience it. And I didn't understand it for the longest time. Like I said, I did not understand it. But when you make a choice, when you make the conscious decision to put your faith in something, it proves itself right or wrong. And so I believe that. I mean, like, you know that if you put your faith in your car's ability to fly and then drove it off a cliff, that it's going to like crash and go down off. The difference is if you put your faith in Jesus, it will never fail. It won't fail you. You won't be ever shuddered or shocked in that faith. And so it's obviously just a little bit different than like something that you have no substantiation for, but you also can see the hundreds of millions of people who've had the experience of putting their faith in this thing, and then they say they trust it, and there's an overwhelming spiritual experience. And we've been talking a lot about objective things in this because I think that's the best way to engage. But Christianity, at the end of the day, has to be anecdotal. There has to be anecdotal evidence, and there has to be the fact that each person requires an individual spiritual experience.
I agree.
And the reason why I would say no to your question, the reason why I would never change my mind, I change my mind all the time on small things, on all the little doctrines that you're talking about. And even the question, you could talk about God's judgment and mercy. That stuff's complicated. It's not 100%. I'm telling you what I believe about it now. But the reality that Jesus Christ came and died and rose again for us is an unshakable faith that no Christian should lose. They might have worries or qualms or thoughts about it sometimes, but there is it's a spiritual experience. And when you encounter him, there is no going back. There is no there's no, before and after in my personal opinion and experience. I haven't been through, hugely detrimental times, so it remains to see how my faith will hold up. But I would just say from my own experience that it is simply something that is, I mean, it's the most real thing that I've ever experienced. And if it is not real, then nothing else I've experienced is real. And so I would tell you that when you have a faith experience, it is that real to you. And it's beyond what can be proven wrong.
So I don't want to, because we could extend this for probably another 3 hours, but, but adding on to that, how would you compare your strength and level of faith to someone who hypothetically has the same like visceral like belief and faith that you do in I know as a Christian you probably would just like doubt it, but for me, whenever I look at two people, you versus somebody who believes in follows Islam or is a Muslim.
Sure.
And somebody who has such a visceral like belief and faith in saying that like me and everybody around me, how our lives have changed, like they can have like the same like like extravagant like description about like their faith and how it's changed them, and like this is the most amazing feeling I've ever felt. To me, those two descriptions sound the same, but they're completely different religions, which is why I go back to the difference in religions and the fact that you can be so confident in religions. You can be confident in the earth being flat. You can be confident that global warming doesn't exist. You can have all those different confidences. You can have all those different faiths and beliefs, but one of you is wrong, one of you is right. And for me, as an outlier, somebody who's looking and saying, like, this is strange to have somebody who's to have two people who are so convinced and so they have such a visceral like feeling reaction, have such a visceral faith that you could both say the same thing, that if this isn't real, nothing else can be real.
Sure.
And obviously like you guys are trying to describe the feeling in your own heads and in your own hearts, that it's hard to like really portray that to somebody. Like you said, you have to feel it to know.
Of course. Yeah.
So I'm sure you can understand my perspective, or any atheist or agnostic perspective, on the fact that like, man, there's so many of these people who believe their own religion so much that like that they have these descriptions of how they feel, that it makes it so difficult to say like, that convinces me more, and of course I think there's so many different things that we could have touched on this topic that we haven't, but I do have to leave pretty soon. So
yes,
we probably just
let me
wrap everything up.
I'll wrap it up on my answer then. I mean, I would say that, like I said, I think faith in the thing that is true. And my view is that something has to be true. So for certain, you can have people who have faith in different things and who have even vehement faith, like you said, in different things. They can fervently believe in something. that doesn't make it true. One thing or the other has to be true. Christianity is exclusive. It says Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So it means either it is true or it is not true. So something has to be true. And so I am, not all Christians would tell you this, but I'm willing to say, like, I'm open to you putting your faith in other things. I think you need to explore what is true. So if you want to go put your faith in Islam, then go put your faith in Islam, because I believe that it will prove itself to be false. Whereas when I put my faith in Christianity, it continually proves itself to be true.
Sure.
It's also the case, finally, that faith is not a commandment to stop investigating. It is an invitation to continue investigating, but faith has to come first. And so I believe that if you put your faith in Islam, for example, and then you went deep investigating that faith and investigating and asking the questions, what is my faith in? What does it mean? What is the reason? And what is the goal? I don't believe Islam answers those questions, nor does any other religion. It doesn't adequately answer the, like, what am I getting out of this? They can't answer that. Like, there's no guaranteed salvation. There's no selfless love, all of the things that I think Christianity has. And it's my personal experience with other religions having not encountered that. And so I would say Christianity is the one religion that, if you put your faith in, proves itself true, because Jesus will come to you in faith and he will demonstrate to you the truth of the religion and the meaning of life. It's the only one that has a clear meaning of life to me personally. I would be open to any objections and conversations about that, but it is my opinion that Christianity is the only true religion that has a clear meaning of life, which is selfless love, and the only thing that would be worth all of this, like we kind of said earlier.
Sure. Yeah. One more, like, just at the very end, I heard someone put this pretty interestingly, how if I am on the outside looking at these different things and not knowing which to pick, because it seems that the people in those religions have the similar reactions or have similar faiths in them. Like, what would be expected for us to do whenever we're, like you said, we can't have other faiths. We can, like, look into different things, but like, for me, the only way for me to really determine which of these is true is which of them comports to reality. Which ones, like, which ones can I look at it and be like, that matches up to life, what I experience in life. And I think everybody does that. Whenever they encounter a religion and they decide whether or not they like it, or whether or not, like, they believe in it, it has to match up with how they experience life, I think, and what they experience daily. Like, for you, Christianity made the most sense because it had everything you wanted in it internally. It had salvation. It had, I mean, obviously,
I'd object to that a little bit.
Sure.
I consider myself a reluctant Christian, so that's a different conversation. But
sure, okay, but yeah, so I'd say that, like, for me, the goal is finding something, not even has to be religion, like, per se, but, like, just finding, like, which is why, like, I align mostly with, like, with philosophical naturalism, and I'm blanking on it, but it's another moral philosophy that I because that matches my moral compass the most. And Christianity didn't. And I discovered that through listening to debate, listening to people give arguments, and thinking that, like, man, the way my mind works and the way my moral compass works aligns more with, secular humanism. That's it. Secular humanism more than it does with any other religion. Because that's how I want to live my life more than I want to live my life, say, if I was a Christian or if I was a Muslim or whatever.
Yes.
But on that note, I would love to come back on here, because there's so many different avenues that we could go through. Because I don't think the majority of Christians understand atheism at all, if not very, very little.
Very true.
And I think that people aren't challenged enough with their beliefs. Even for me, when I was growing up, I was raised in an echo chamber. And there are children who are raised in their own specific circumstances and their own specific religions who are echo chambers their entire lives. Yes. And they never once think to try to look at things in another perspective. And that's all I've ever wanted for my life, is to always be open to different perspectives. I think that's the height of empathy, is understanding people's points and not jumping to conclusions about what they believe and hating them for it.
100%.
So, but I'd love to come back on here. It's been a great pleasure. I wish I could stay
Yes.
on for another couple hours, but
Yes. Well, that's why I offered to do part 2s. Maybe we'll do this again
Exactly.
sometime. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very productive conversation. So,
I agree.
Nolan, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I
Thank
hope you
you.
have a good night.
You too.